All right, welcome again, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to the seventh event, seventh already, in the Corrupting the Environment series, jointly initiated and organized by the Basel Institute on Governance and the OECD, with today featuring an exciting country-specific focus and a global release, I should say, of a brand new public opinion survey. To our Indonesian participants, Selamat Hari Kemerdekaan ke-76, Happy Independence Day, which was yesterday. My name is Yohani Grossman, and I'm the Basel Institute on Governance's Green Corruption Program team leader, the convener of the event series, and have the pleasure of being your moderator today. A few household items. We have 3 speakers for you today, all fantastic experts in their field. We'd love to hear from all our participants. Please do send in your questions, and the speakers will be able to respond towards the end. And there is a question and answer function here. And of course, that includes our participants from Indonesia, who should please feel free to send in questions you might have in Bahasa Indonesia. Everybody can read them and understand them. So corruption and the environment, probably 2 of the most intertwined governance topics, governance challenges of our time. We see that each of them permeates all aspects of our societies. Environmental degradation, for example, as highlighted by last week's reports of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and by the global pandemic of COVID-19, has accelerated pace to the degree that it's hard to fathom, that it was hard to fathom even a few years ago. On the other hand, corruption is corrosive to all elements of organized human society. The latest example in the news this week is the total governance rot in Afghanistan that was a major contributor to the implosion of a structure, of a governance structure that was built at tremendous cost over the last 20 years. But of course, we have many less dramatic examples in our everyday lives, not least the response to the global pandemic, unfortunately. Indonesia is a particularly interesting country in this regard because of the unparalleled diversity of both its nature and, unfortunately, also its governance challenges. There are many efforts underway, many reform efforts underway, both in the conservation and governance field. And while some of them are donor-supported, the vast majority are driven by Indonesian government, civil society, private sector, and academia. And so we're very pleased to have representatives from these sectors here today. Unfortunately, few of these sectors are integrated at this stage, so engagements that look at environmental, or as we call it at the Institute, green corruption, still remain the exceptions. While those of us who are fighting it struggle to integrate these issues, criminals certainly have no challenge with integration. As we can see by high-profile scandals over the last few years related to environmental corruption, involving, for example, the Minister of Fisheries, Edi Prabowo, over lobster larvae export permit bribery, or in fact, the Chairman of Parliament, Speaker of Parliament, Setia Novanto, in relation to mining ownership transfer corruption. Thankfully, we have an excellent group of speakers to illuminate the complexity of the issue from a range of angles. And first up, I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Burhanuddin Muhtadi, who is the Director of Public Affairs at LSI, a leading polling outfit in Indonesia, hugely influential in making sure government policy is evidence-based, as much as politicians anywhere can be influenced by facts anyway. He holds a PhD from Australian National University and has widely published in international academic journals. I've had the pleasure of working not just with Burhan, but with all 3 speakers during my time in Indonesia, and so I'm greatly looking forward to the discussion. Burhan will present the findings of the survey that LSI conducted together with the Basel Institute in July 2021, so it's hot off the press, on Indonesians' perceptions of environmental corruption. So Borhan, over to you. Could you please share some of the results from the survey with our audience? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Johanny, for your kind introduction. Let me share my presentation material. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Burhanuddin Muhtadi from Indonesian Survey Institute. First of all, I would like to express my deepest thanks to Basel Institute and USAID for the opportunity to speak here. I am so thrilled to present the result of our collaborative research on environmental corruption. Much has been written about the nexus between environmental degradation and corruption. In resource-rich Indonesia, the importance of this issue cannot be undermined. In the forestry sector alone, the government of Indonesia suffered more than $2 billion state loss per year from illegal logging and more than $60 billion from unreported timber between 2003 and 2014. While numerous studies have highlighted the government weaknesses in explaining the prevalence of corruption in the environmental sector in Indonesia, little is known about how Indonesians think about environmental corruption. What do Indonesians think about palm oil plantation? Are foreign companies considered more or less corrupt than Indonesian firms engaged in natural resource extraction? And how compliant a mining firm with environmental regulation? So to gain a better insight into what the Indonesian think about this issue and other relevant corruption and natural resources, the Basel Institute on Governance and Indonesian Survey Institute LSI jointly conducted a national poll supported by USAID during July 2021. A total of 2,580 respondents selected through random sampling method was surveyed. The respondent consists of 1,200 base sample from all provinces throughout Indonesia, which are proportionally distributed, and additional respondent in 4 oversampled provinces selected based on the criteria of the level of corruption and the contribution of natural resources. And due to COVID-19 restriction, because of the latest COVID-19 surge, the survey was conducted through phone by trained interviewers. And assuming a simple random sampling method, the base sample size of 1,200 respondents has margin of error about plus minus 2.9% at 95 confidence level. So concern about the environment has emerged as one of the most salient issues during the last few decades in major Western nations. In the US, for instance, compared with a decade ago, more Americans say protecting the environment and dealing with global climate change should be top priorities for the President and Congress, according to Pew Research Center survey in 2020. Nearly 2/3 of US adults say protecting the environment should be a top priority, while about half say the same about dealing with global climate change. This share, as you can see from this slide, have grown considerably since 2011-2012. And indeed, if you look at the right side of the slide, defending the country against terrorism remains a top priority, 74% among the public overall. But as you can see from this slide, the percentage difference between terrorism and environmental issues as top priorities is small. Similarly, the environment is something Europeans care deeply about. 67% European would like European Union to do more on environmental protection, according to Eurobarometer survey in 2015. And of course, if you look at this map, there are significant differences in the way this policy is perceived in different member states. With a few exceptions, there is a trend, there is a pattern of Central and Eastern European countries being less supportive of further intensification of European Union involvement in environmental policies than Western European countries. As you can see from this map, the strongest support comes from Sweden, 83%, and the lowest from Estonia, 45%. And the question is, how about Indonesia? So our recent national survey found that the problem of employment and economic growth are the issues that generate high public concern in Indonesia. While the public level of concern for the environmental degradation and climate change is lower, Indonesian citizens are similarly concerned about these two issues. So our finding suggests that people equally concerned about economic development and environment. So they do understand environmental degradation is an issue, but at the same time, Indonesian adults need job, they need employment, they need economic growth. So the solution have to resolve both issues. So we also found that the majority of the public have a positive attitudes toward the government in balancing economic growth and environmental concern. So they believe that the government can protect the environment. Frankly, this finding is quite surprising because at the time of the survey was conducted last month, trust in the government in general was declining as Indonesian authorities struggling to contain its latest COVID-19 surge. There are gender differences in corruption and environment as well as other issues. Men are more concerned than women about environmental degradation and climate change. However, as you can see, the right panel of this slide, women seems to trust the government significantly less in the environmental protection effort and balancing effort between environmental protection and economic growth. It is unclear why that is and what it means, but the pattern appears across categories, and Johanny and I suspect a big factor that women are less confident in giving speakers' answer. Meanwhile, our finding also show that individual differences in terms of age group, the level of income, education didn't make a big difference in explaining the issue they care about and the trust to the government. So overall, if you look at this graph, there is quite protectionist attitudes toward the nature resource management in Indonesia. The two parties that are considered as the most appropriate to manage nature resources are SOEs and people cooperative or kooperasi. The view that SOE are better suited to manage nature resources business is evident in the mining sector, wildlife capture and export, and waste processing and importing. Meanwhile, the people cooperative are viewed as the most suitable for managing fishing and marine resources. Private companies, represented by blue one, under 15% in all categories, and even foreign companies, the orange one don't go above 2%. So more explicitly, vast majority of respondents agree that forest investment in nature resources should be limited. The left one, the left side of this slide. So the sectors that the public mostly display strong agreement in foreign investment restriction in mining, and then fishing and marine resources, followed by plantation, wildlife capture and export, and trade and import of waste. Such strong sentiment among resource nationalism doesn't appear in the business community survey, the right side of this slide. So we have business survey in cooperation with the Australian National University 2019. And as you can see from this slide, the majority of business people in Indonesia strongly agree or quite agree that Indonesia must be more open to foreign investment from other countries or more open to trade with other countries. So there is a big difference between general population surveys and Business Survey. So interestingly, if you look at this slide, the perceived level of corruption in various sectors doesn't seem to differ significantly between Indonesian and foreign companies. In other words, when the respondents said that they were reluctant to foreign investment, they didn't say that these foreign investments are more vulnerable to corruption. They're aware that when natural resources are managed by SOE, it can be vulnerable to corruption, but they choose SOE anyway. So their protectionist attitude is not due to corruption. If we look at the reason why they are so protectionist to natural resources, the top reason is about economy and politics. So it's less about environment and corruption. For those who agree or strongly agree with the restriction on foreign investment, the most cited reason why the general population is that they believe foreign companies are primarily working for their own interests, not working for the benefit of Indonesian people. It's about 30% of respondents who said so. Some also believe that Indonesia can be more independent if it manages its own natural resources, 27%, and Indonesian state revenues will be greater if it manages its own natural resources, 26%. Well, the reason that foreign companies pollute more or more corrupt than local companies are mentioned less, just only 9% and 5% respectively. So the majority of the public, 60%, when we conducted the research last month, believe that the current level of corruption in Indonesia has increased in the last 2 years, and in the past 1 month, perception of corruption tend to increase, and this downward trend is mainly due to the controversial KPK law revision that had weakened the anti-corrupt body. I think Bang Laude can speak better on this. It is also maybe affected by uncovered big corruption cases involving 2 ministers of President Joko Widodo, Social Affairs Minister and the Maritime Affairs and Fisheries Minister. So despite the widespread perception of corruption in various sectors, as I have explained earlier, overall there is a quite positive attitude toward palm oil plantation. So of those who know about the plantation, 2/3 think that the plantation do not harm the environment. Almost 60% say that the benefit outweigh the harm. 52% also think that almost all or most of the plantation companies are compliant with licensing rule. However, if we look at more deeply, based on the demographic profile of the respondent, you can see from this graph, the majority of respondents who prefer, who have more positive attitudes toward plantation, mainly a low education background, graduated from elementary school, and women. And in terms of the management of natural resources, as you can see from this graph, the majority of respondents prefer SOE or people cooperative, and very low numbers want private firm. There is a notable difference between how people perceive plantation versus mining in terms of whether it harms the environment. So out of those who have knowledge on mining, only 29% who say that it doesn't harm the environment. Half of those who know about the mining still think mining companies have greater benefit than the damage they cause. So in addition, public was divided over whether the mining companies are compliant with environmental regulation. As you can see from this slide, 42% think that mining companies are compliant, but 48%, almost 50%, think that only a small number are compliant, almost none are compliant. Again, as expected, those who have more positive attitudes on mining, mostly low education background, and men. Last, overall, the public attitude toward fishery sector is very positive. Among those possess knowledge of the fishery sectors, the vast majority believe the fisheries are necessary and benevolent, mostly conducted by individual fishermen. 74% believe that the main problem with fisheries on foreign fishing vessel. However, 44.5% of respondents who have knowledge on the fishery sector, fishermen are conducted on industrial scale in a way that severely harm the environment. And 52% of respondents who have knowledge and work in fishery sector said fish stock have decreased with reason a split between climate change, foreign vessel, and the government is not doing enough to curb illegal fishing. So in conclusion, although pressing concern over the environmental impact of natural resource business sector is not as prevalent as in Western countries, quite a significant portion of Indonesian people do pay attention to environmental issues. They generally do not view economic development and environment as mutually exclusive priorities or as zero-sum game. In other words, they knew very well that environmental degradation impact is a serious issue that need to be addressed. But at the same time, they also admitted that the economic interests which are tied to natural resource industry also took priority. Thus, it is necessary to find a balanced win-win solution between economic and environmental issues. In the public perception of preference for management of natural resources, nationalist and statist or state-run oriented sentiment emerge at the same time. So Indonesian citizens generally think that natural resources should be managed by SOE or people cooperative. And the vast majority of respondents also display their anti-foreign investment sentiment in natural resource sector, which in their opinion should be limited. Interestingly, the perceived level of corruption in various natural resource sector doesn't seem to differ significantly between local Indonesian and foreign companies. So the prevalent reason of the anti-foreign investment sentiment is not due to corruption or environmental issues, but rather because of nationalism and the belief that foreign companies' operations do not work for the benefit of Indonesian people interests. So this protectionist sentiment has arguably dulled the people's rational capacity, which lead to their rather permissive attitudes toward corruption. The respondent hold perception that inside many SOEs are also riddled with dirty practices of corruption and inefficiencies, but they still feel that SOE have more rightful claim or legitimate right to manage Indonesian natural resources as opposed to the foreign companies. Moreover, in the context of globalization, it is difficult to separate foreign and local ownership. Many local companies nowadays are controlled by a foreign shareholder or even headquarters and listed abroad in Singapore, for example. And beside nationalist sentiment, our survey also discovered statist sentiment. Indonesian people generally feel that natural resources are better managed by state-owned companies rather than individual or private companies. And last but not least, among the three natural resource sector, public perception of the mining sectors is much worse than plantation and fishery sectors. And the public generally assess the level of compliance of mining companies to licensing rule and regulation as lower than plantation and fishery companies, and also that mining companies are believed to be more damaging to the environment. I stop my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Burhan. It's really a very insightful survey, and your conclusions, I think, are helpful for us to really gain an insight into this complex issue. For me, I mean, still, I've read the findings many times. I've seen the report, and still, from a Western perspective, now that I live in Europe, where environmental concerns, including environmental concerns in Indonesia, are a big debate, including during a recent referendum on a free trade agreement that we had here with Indonesia, I am reminded how sometimes in the West we look at environmental concerns, environmental conservation in other countries, for example, in Indonesia, from a somewhat ignorant perspective, where we want other countries to conserve their environment and take the economic hit that comes along with that, but we don't necessarily consider the same in our environment, in our country. So it's really insightful, I think, that close connection between economic growth, between jobs, and between environmental conservation, that these are not seen as mutually exclusive in Indonesian citizens' attitudes. And of course, the dislike of the private sector and love of state-owned enterprises, I think for all of us in the anti-corruption field, that's somewhat disheartening, but nonetheless very important for us, I think, to understand these sentiments better as we design interventions, as we design programs to try and address these challenges. All right,